Today we are producing more than 3 million pages, including more than 2,000 videos and 180,000 images. In total, that means that the department produced approximately 3.5 million pages in compliance with the Act.
When the U.S. Department of Justice released millions of pages from what it branded the Epstein Library, it did not deliver a list of indictments. It delivered something more destabilizing, a ledger of proximity. In modern elite society, proximity is currency. It buys access, prestige, deal flow and, occasionally, plausible deniability. But in the case of Jeffrey Epstein, proximity has become radioactive. The newly digitized archive, emails, calendars, birthday notes, flight logs, has triggered a rolling cascade of resignations across finance, academia, diplomacy, and politics. No one newly named has been charged with Epstein's crimes. Yet many have found their positions untenable all the same. The lesson is not that guilt is contagious. It is that reputation is. The archive as detonator. Epstein's criminal history was hardly obscure. In 2008 he pleaded guilty in Florida to state charges related to soliciting prostitution, including from a minor, and served a 13-month sentence with work release privileges so generous they bordered on parody. In 2019 he was arrested again, this time on federal sex trafficking charges, and died by suicide in a Manhattan jail weeks later. The scandal was never about secrecy, it was about selective amnesia. The new document dump shatters that amnesia. Emails that were once private now sit beneath a blue and gold federal header, searchable and permanent. The aesthetic of bureaucratic transparency, privacy notices, search bars, official seals, creates an institutional irony. The state that once struck a lenient deal now curates the evidence of who chose to remain in the predator's orbit afterward. The most politically inconvenient detail is chronological. Many of those now stepping down maintained cordial contact with Epstein after his 2008 conviction. The defense, therefore, is not ignorance of his character, but misjudgment of its importance. The elite's favorite alibi, poor judgment. The language of contrition has been strikingly uniform. Terrible judgment. Misguided decision. Regret ever knowing him. The script writes itself. At Goldman Sachs, Catherine Ruemmler, the bank's chief legal officer and a former White House counsel, resigned after it emerged she had been among the people Epstein phoned following his 2019 arrest and had once thanked him for luxury gifts. She expressed sympathy for victims and regret for association. That has become the standard formula, empathy plus error. In hospitality, Thomas Pritzker stepped down as chairman of Hyatt Hotels Corporation after friendly post-2008 exchanges surfaced. In global ports, Sultan Ahmed bin Sulayem resigned from DP World after being described in Epstein correspondence as a most trusted friend. In elite law, Brad Karp relinquished leadership of Paul Weiss following disclosures of convivial dinners and career favors sought. None of these individuals has been charged with criminal wrongdoing in connection with Epstein. But the reputational market has rendered its own verdict. Continued leadership requires not merely legality, but judgment. And judgment, once doubted, rarely recovers in full. Politics, contamination without conviction. If business is governed by shareholder confidence, politics is ruled by optics. The archive has scorched both. Bill Clinton, who flew on Epstein's private jet in the early 2000s, now faces congressional testimony. His spokesperson insists he knew nothing of Epstein's crimes. The former president has even called for greater transparency in the document release. Yet the spectacle of a former occupant of the Oval Office explaining old social ties to a convicted sex offender illustrates how proximity outlives protestation. Hillary Clinton, though stating she does not recall speaking to Epstein, has also been subpoenaed and has echoed calls for full disclosure. Transparency, once demanded by activists, is now the preferred shield of the implicated. In Britain, the fallout has been even more theatrically political. Peter Mandelson lost his post as ambassador to Washington after renewed scrutiny of affectionate notes to Epstein and allegations of impropriety. His departure triggered the resignation of Morgan McSweeney, chief of staff, to Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who accepted responsibility for the appointment. Starmer himself never knew Epstein. It scarcely matters. In politics, contagion spreads through association. Not acquaintance, royalty has not been spared. Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, long mired in controversy over his ties to Epstein and a civil settlement with accuser Virginia Giuffre, has already been stripped of titles. The fresh disclosures merely deepen the sense that aristocratic insulation offers little protection against archival persistence, academia, and the seduction of access. Universities, that peculiar blend of moral posturing and donor dependence, have also felt the tremors. Larry Summers stepped back from public commitments after disclosures that he continued communicating with Epstein post-conviction and had been named as a backup executor in a version of Epstein's will. Harvard University, where Summers once served as president, had previously faced scrutiny over its own institutional ties to the financier. At Yale University, Professor David Galernder has been barred from teaching pending review, following emails that mixed academic referrals with unguarded commentary about students. The content may have been tasteless rather than criminal. But in the post-archive era, tastelessness is combustible, the underlying pattern is depressingly familiar. Epstein offered what universities and their luminaries prize: introductions, funding, prestige, the aura of influence. That he did so after a conviction for exploiting minors speaks less to ignorance than to the moral elasticity of elite networks. The geography of reputational risk, one might have assumed the scandal to be peculiarly American. The archive demonstrates otherwise. In France, Jack Lang resigned from the Arab World Institute amid investigation into financial links. In Norway, Mona Juul stepped down as ambassador after revelations about a family bequest, while former Prime Minister Thorbjorn Jagland faces corruption charges linked to gifts and travel. In Slovakia, Miroslav Lajčák resigned after crude messages resurfaced. In Britain, Jess Staley, once chief executive of Barclays, has already been fined and banned from misleading regulators about his relationship with Epstein. The common thread is not ideology or nationality. It is membership in a transnational class for whom Epstein functioned as connector-in-chief, a broker of introductions, opportunities and, allegedly, appetites. The illusion of separation, repeatedly, those implied emphasize distance. They never visited the island. They declined invitations. They discussed philanthropy, films, and macroeconomics. Communication with a predator, they insist, does not make one a predator. This is true. But it elides the more uncomfortable question: why was communication desirable at all after 2008? Epstein's power did not derive from elected office or corporate control. It derived from access to money, to famous names, to rooms where powerful people wished to be seen. The new files reveal that many continued to value that access even when the cost was obvious. The reputational damage now unfolding is therefore less about criminal complicity than about moral calculus. Leaders are being punished not for what they did with Epstein, but for what they tolerate to remain close. Transparency as reckoning. The Department of Justice's archive is, in one sense, merely documentary. It proves no new crimes. It issues no fresh convictions. Yet it has done what criminal proceedings alone could not: it has exposed the architecture of elite sociability. In doing so, it underscores a transformation in accountability. In the digital age, archives are not dusty repositories but political actors. Searchable PDFs can topple ambassadors. Email subject lines can end board tenures. A birthday book inscription can imperil a government. Being mentioned in the files does not imply guilt. But it does eliminate ambiguity about association. For institutions, banks, universities, governments, that trade on trust and ambiguity is intolerable. The aftermath of access, the Epstein saga, is often framed as a story about one man's depravity and failures of law enforcement. It is that. But the latest chapter reframes it as a story about elite culture, about the willingness to compartmentalize, to rationalize, to accept moral blemish in exchange for proximity to power. The resignations now unfolding are less a purge than a recalibration. Institutions are signaling that the cost of association, once discounted, has risen sharply. Shareholders, voters, and students are less forgiving of poor judgment when the judgment in question concerned a convicted sex offender. Epstein cultivated the rich and powerful as a collector might cure rare artifacts. The archive reveals the collection in reverse, not trophies on his wall, but names in his inbox. In the end, the most consequential revelation may not be who committed crimes, those cases belong to prosecutors, but who decided, after knowing enough, that the relationship was still worth it. For the global elite, the message is bracingly simple: in the age of permanent archives, the address book is destiny.